Hi, and welcome to the Glasswall podcast. Today we're talking to Glasswall Chief Product Officer Paul Farrington. Paul, hello and welcome.
Hi, David. Great to be with you.
The topic we're looking at today is delivering security at scale. And the context for this is that as more applications, services, and data are moved to the cloud, security's got the challenge of keeping pace with this amazing speed of change, and to do so with cloud native technologies. So, Paul, over the next few minutes, you're going to walk us through this important issue. And you're also going to focus on one particular piece of cloud native technology, which is Kubernetes, and its role in meeting this need for security at scale. But before we get there, can I ask you to explain what's meant by cloud native and why this is important in the cybersecurity context?
Yeah, sure. So these technologies have really come to the fore because of organizations deploying into cloud environments and really coming to trying to come to terms with the challenges of deploying infrastructure at scale and moving beyond the need to actually deploy physical boxes or even virtualized machines. And trying to break down or decompose monolithic applications, so applications which you kind of think of spaghetti code, which is really hard to maintain, resistance to change and innovation. And so when you think about that driving force that organizations have to compete in the market, to innovate faster, to be agile, the need to be able to affect change has really driven organizations to try and figure out how best to deploy the computing services particularly into cloud environments that really are kind of go with the grain, as it were, of needing to achieve agility. So cloud native technologies just really help to organizations to build and run scalable applications in a really dynamic environment. So it could be public, private, and hybrid clouds. And some of the attributes that you would see of cloud native technologies would be the use of containers. So you've heard, I'm sure, of Docker, and that's just one kind of species, as it were, of how containers can be managed. There's open standards now with how containers can be used in production. So it doesn't necessarily just need to be Docker as a technology. You also see functions as a service. So this is the so-called serverless computing. Actually, there are servers behind them. These functions, though, as they're exposed to the average user or the developer that's kind of creating functionality using functionalist computing, it basically abstracts away all the cares around infrastructure, and so you can just focus on building kind of discrete functions, and then basically composing those together to have a system which is highly functional and lots of agility. So cloud native technologies, including Kubernetes, are really the kind of the modern approach for how you deploy and then run your applications, but also have change built in, or the ability to change built in to how we think about maintaining an application.
So this is contributing to an environment where organizations really need to deliver security at scale. And but why is that important? And where does the cloud fit in? And perhaps why can't traditional security technologies meet those needs?
So I think some of the cloud native technologies, they bring both opportunity and challenges for organizations. So some of the opportunities that they afford organizations is to be, as I mentioned, far more agile, to be able to decompose and to separate concerns in how you actually construct your applications and to deploy those into your production environments. And that's great. That really helps teams to move faster with greater velocity, and also for the operations people to have greater confidence and to have that certainty, predictability about how the systems are going to run at scale. But what that also demands is a change in how we think about security, because some of these technologies don't come secure out of the box. They need to be hardened. We need to think about how to observe security at scale across these cloud native environments. In particular, if you're using containers, microservices, and Kubernetes, we need to think about how we're running those deployments at scale in a secure fashion. But also, some of the other opportunities which are now afforded to companies is the ability to assess the security posture in a way which is far more efficient and scalable. And it's not just about the software that's running. Think about the data which is flowing between these different services. So if we think about files, for example, being able to understand at any moment in time whether the file's at rest or in transit, what the security posture is for that object of that data object, the file, the business document, and to be able to remove those threats. So having the ability to inject security into different processes because it's more discrete, it's arguably far more maintainable. This is a fantastic opportunity for organizations to use these contemporary technologies and to really address security in a far more elegant and scalable way.
Right, and we've mentioned Kubernetes a couple of times in relation to being cloud native and scalable security, but in a wider sense, there's a bigger background here, isn't there? Because Kubernetes is having a much bigger impact than security, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Kubernetes is really helping organizations to drive down the cost of infrastructure. And it's not just limited to Kubernetes. So serverless computing, so functions as a service. You may have heard of Lambda functions, for example, with AWS, the ability to run code very discreetly, not necessarily to have to care about having to spin up servers to run these functions. So serverless computing, that definitely is one pattern that's kind of core to cloud native technologies, which it answers the scalability question. It answers the ability to execute discrete pieces of code very rapidly and at scale. And then Kubernetes is, I guess, a complementary technology, but is perhaps arguably more concerned about being able to execute any type of software. If you can put it into a container and you can make it run, then Kubernetes, is very, very affectionate to that type of design pattern. So arguably, and there are people who are perhaps have bias for particular types of technologies, but arguably Kubernetes is more tolerant of a hybrid approach. Is certainly tolerant of the heterogeneity of how you want to compose your systems, and so that gives great utility to organizations in how they think about responding to the market and being able to decouple what the concerns are of the system and to be able to interact with other systems, and to do that at scale and to have what we're trying to achieve in these deployments is observability. So to understand at any moment in time the system health and then to be able to react to problems in real time. And as load is presented to the environment, so let's say it's an organization that it's a bookshop. It's approaching Christmas. The latest top selling book has come on the market. You need to be able to scale to the potential demand that may present itself on any particular day, maybe because of a sales campaign. So the burstability, the kind of the infinite scale that Kubernetes and, for that matter, serverless computing can provide is highly attractive. And then when the campaign or the that season of promotions has kind of waned, being able to scale back down your infrastructure, that is really quite something. And that's one of the reasons why we're just seeing such demand in some of these cloud native technologies.
So focusing on security specifically, how does Glasswall use Kubernetes in its product strategy?
So we have an open architecture approach to how we allow our customers to deploy Kubernetes. So that might be as part of a managed Kubernetes service, say AKS from Azure, and be able to deploy the Glasswall CDR platform, as we call it, which is really just a Kubernetes based environment which runs our core engine in pods across various nodes within a cluster, and to be able to then provide industrial scale to our customers, to be able to remove those threats from files at kind of breathtaking scale. So, for example, you may want to go from having 100 files an hour being processed and for the threats to be removed, but then to be able to burst up to say 100,000 files in the same hour because of some particular need that's presenting itself. So the way that Glasswall thinks about the deployment of our core technology, which is essentially the engine SDK, which runs, as I say, in a pod, and that's really the goodness that we provide to our users in helping them to analyze the threats that potentially exist in those files, and then to remove those files and to return a completely safe and rebuilt file back to the end user. And really Kubernetes is just a means to an end in being able to provide that utility at incredible scale. And the flexibility which the architecture affords our customers and users is really quite impressive, because you can kind of integrate and bolt on additional plugins to that environment. So if you want to kind of surface some kind of user interface, say a file drop for users to be able to perform what I just spoke about, but to do that in a very visual way, that's something which is easily to configure. Or if you want to be more programmatic as to how you deploy the technology, and for it to say link to a software application that might be going to paint a picture here. You've got an application where you're receiving, say, passport photos or resumes, CVs from candidates that are perhaps applying for a job or want some help in looking for a job. Potentially, some of those files may contain threats. They may be malicious in nature, and you need to be able to to hand off those files to a service that is going to be, have greater efficacy than just an antivirus scanner, that's going to be able to remove those threats and return the file back to the software application for it to move forwards in actually being able to then deal with the data which it's receiving from the user. And so there's lots of different ways in which we can deploy the technology. And I mentioned there it can be it can be set up as part of a managed Kubernetes service from, say, AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure, or if you can run it in your own data center or in your own private public cloud, and to manage, say, the Helm charts. We provide Terraform scripts which allow you to then to run the service in the way that you want it to be configured. So because it's open architecture, you have ultimate control as to how that operates within your environment, and that's really just leveraging the power that Kubernetes provides and the utility to the user. And
when we were talking about this offline, you kind of used a really useful analogy to help me kind of understand those points. I mean, can you share that with us again?
Yeah, so there's a constant debate about whether or not you should be treating your deployments in relation to Kubernetes as pets or as cattle. And I don't think there's really a right or wrong in this. There's probably a balance that needs to be struck. So let me first explain what I mean by the analogy. So you think of pets as something that you kind of love and nurture every day, spend a lot of time with, you're affectionate to each other, and you're totally invested in that relationship. Whereas arguably with cattle, whilst you're very respectful to the animal, you certainly care about that animal, but ultimately there is a utility there, and at the end of the day, that relationship won't survive forever. The animal will move on, and that's just the nature of that particular relationship. So there's perhaps there's less emotional investment, there's less time being spent with that animal, and so that's the kind of the frame of the analogy. So we're bringing it back to Kubernetes and how you think about deploying your systems. You kind of need to really to decide where you want to be on that continuum, because it matters. if you're going to invest lots and lots of time in building up a system, tweaking it, patching it, but doing it in a way which isn't necessarily repeatable. So if you're not doing that as infrastructure as code, to use the jargon, so that's really codifying every change you ever make and writing that down into a script essentially that can be run to kind of recreate any changes that you make. If you don't have that utility or that ability to recreate what you have, then that investment of time and effort and maybe love that you have for that system may be misguided, because when disaster strikes, if you can't recreate that environment very quickly and with certainty as to how that will be stood back up within a small amount of time, then that could be a challenge. So there's a school of thought which encourages people to think about the deployments, Kubernetes, and for that matter, any type of system, where you have less affection for how long that environment might exist for. And if the worst comes to the worst, if the internet weather or the network weather goes against you, you can't figure out how to return a deployment back to a good, healthy state, that you stand up another one very quickly using your infrastructure as code, and then you say goodbye to that cluster, i.e. you terminate its existence. And so you're kind of more cold, less caring in some regards as to how that cluster or that deployment of Kubernetes is functioning, and just take more of a utilitarian approach to how you interact with those deployments. And the good news is the Glasswall really is agnostic in how we think about and how we service those types of design preferences, because there's, as you think about that continuum, there are merits to lots of different approaches, and it's where really the customer wants to draw the line as to how they want to configure the systems, their solutions. And Glasswall, because of the way we approach our deployments, we can provide that flexibility and utility to customers. So, and that's again coming back to our philosophy of having an open architecture, which fundamentally puts the power into the users, into the customers' hands to decide how they want to deploy and to maintain their systems. And we're completely agnostic to that. But it's something that we are very deliberate and cognizant about, making sure that we're able to support that.
Okay, and that also illustrates a difference in the way Glasswall approaches scalability from others in the sector.
Arguably, I mean, to have that approach where we try to meet the customer where we find them, and there's going to be incredible heterogeneity in terms of how organizations think about their deployments, what their design preferences will be. Some might just want to receive a machine image, an AMI image, for example, for AWS, and that's what they want to stand up, and that's good enough. In some cases, it will be to be able to deploy into a managed service. As I mentioned, for Azure AKS, so the managed service is taking care of the patching and arguably the security posture of that Kubernetes environment. And in some cases, customers will want to deploy and for them to have effectively a Kubernetes native deployment with it onto their bare metal. And that's something which we can support as well, and be able to provide that flexibility. So, of course, there are lots of vendors that have similar approaches, but what we're trying to address here is the need for flexibility and to avoid customers, crucially, being locked in to any particular paradigm or any particular commercial service, which then becomes resistant to change or something which is potentially going to cost them more money than they would choose to spend for a particular type of deployment. So we're trying to work with the grain of the the customer's organization and give them that flexibility as to how they can move forwards with Glasswall.
Great. So to just bring that to life for us, Paul, I mean, can you pick out a typical use case?
So the way that Glasswall is offering our service is probably very similar to many other organizations. So we have, as I mentioned, at the heart of what we do is a software engine which is performing an analysis of files and helping the customer to remove the threats from those files. It's quite simple in nature. It's complex in terms of the analysis and the rigor which is being applied within that kind of processing unit. But beyond that, the main concern then is being able to do that at scale and to be able to have that scalability, the resilience, to be able to observe what's going right, what's not working, to be able to self-heal. And these are all features that you get out the box effectively from a Kubernetes environment. So in many ways, we're kind of right in the middle of the road in terms of how we think about the use of this technology. We have a RESTful API which exposes from a programmatic perspective how integrators, development teams can actually interact with Glasswall and not have to click mouse buttons to avail the service that we provide, but actually to write their own code or to use code which we provide to them so they can integrate Glasswall into the enterprise solutions. So that's kind of very much a normal pattern of how Glasswall thinks about the deploying Kubernetes within the customer's environment or within our own hosted cloud environment. But examples of use cases though that we see quite frequently. So we'll have customers that maybe they've had some kind of infection, some breach within their environment. They need to redeploy the infrastructure. So we're talking about servers, desktop machines, just everything they need within that corporate environment to run and maintain their organization. They're pulling files back from backup. And before they deploy those files back into that clean, safe environment that's just been stood back up again following the infection, they want to make sure that the threats that may exist from from the backup tape or whatever the backup storage was, that those files are now clean from the original malware, maybe the ransomware which had originally infected those files. So we see lots of organizations needing to have the capability, perhaps via partners of Glasswall, to be able to remove those threats from those files, and to do that at scale and to do that with great urgency. And so Glasswall can in that example provide that kind of very scalable solution in a moment of time where there's great need and where there's time pressures to be able to do that. And do it quickly, but to a very high standard of security. And then, of course, there's the more kind of everyday business use case where you have users, employees within, say, an office environment or remotely working, touching files. They're perhaps unsure about the provenance of that file. Where did it come from? Who's touched it previously? Who's written to that file and potentially created malicious code that might exist in, say, that Word document that has a macro contained in it. And what you really want as an organization is to ensure that employees have the ability and confidence to interact with data and to do that at speed, to perform their job without getting in the way of what they do. But in order for that to happen, they need to have the tools and the services at their fingertips to ensure that data files are safe to interact with. So, one example that we might cite there is having the ability to drag files into a drop zone that then automatically removes the threats from the files and puts it back into a location that the user can then interact with and to go about their business. And not just for one file, but maybe say for 1,000 files, but to do that within a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes, and for them to be able to have the confidence that they can move on and go about achieving the objective for that day. And so Glasswall in that setting is really completely transparent to the user. We're not getting in the way. In fact, actually that's an example of security helping the employee to move faster, because they're not having to second guess whether or not something's safe to open.
Excellent. And just finally for today, Paul, is it possible to look a few years ahead, 3 to 5 years ahead perhaps, and think about what impact Kubernetes might have on the delivery of cybersecurity at scale?
Yeah, so I think Kubernetes, serverless computing, they will be the mainstay of, in terms of IT deployments within organizations. So scaled enterprise applications will be leveraging Kubernetes, which is, we haven't necessarily spoken about this at length, but, the adoption of containerized code, so software running in containers, typically these days as microservices. This has been, really revolutionary over the last, 6-7 years. So Kubernetes, I think, kind of burst onto the scenes in 2014. I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see that continue in terms of adoption and strength. But we're also going to obviously see innovation. We're perhaps going to see more substitutes or innovations, and so how we deploy this type of technology will certainly evolve. And I would expect the popularity of substitute services to come to the fore as well. But I think for now, as far as we can see into the future, cloud native technologies, serverless computing, Kubernetes, containers, they are here to stay. And I think they're really helping organizations to move forward in thinking about how they adopt security patterns to achieve a security posture which is, fits with their risk appetite. As I've mentioned before, you don't get security for nothing. It doesn't necessarily come for free, or as you open the box with some of these cloud native technologies. You have to work at it and then harden them and make sure that you're being very deliberate about how you deploy these environments. And Glasswall is laser focused on ensuring that the security of our solutions is as bulletproof as it possibly can be. But I think organizations, this is a huge opportunity for organizations to retool and to streamline how they think about deploying their software to be as responsive as they possibly can be to the market and to the needs of the users. So, as far as I'm concerned, very excited about the future and how we can ensure that security is baked into the things that we try to achieve within business.
Paul, always great to talk to you, and thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, David.